Hello again, welcome to General Psychology, Psychology 101, and today we're going to be talking about psychology as a science. So, as human beings, we are not great at actually perceiving and understanding how the world actually works, seeing is not believing. And oftentimes our perceptual systems are biased, limited, or often distorted. What we think is true isn't always true and is sometimes completely false. For example, if I say to you, opposites attract, you may hear that and think, oh yeah, of course, that's true. But then what if I follow that up with birds of a feather flock together? Well, also that's true, you might think. Well, these two things can't agree with each other. And there are often little idioms that we might hear and think, oh yeah, of course that's true, when oftentimes that's not actually the case. Another example of this is if you've seen a football game, or maybe you've seen someone else watching a football game. And a lot of times, if you're rooting for a specific team, you tend to see all the iffy calls, all the referees make, go against your team. So for example, you may have two people in the same room following two different teams, seeing the exact same play completely differently. So we are biased in how we understand the world, how we perceive the world, and how we interpret our world. And so because we're biased as human beings, you may think, how can we possibly study psychology? And this reinforces the fact that we need to examine these psychological phenomena in a very systematic and objective way. It should be the case where the way I specifically am examining a phenomenon is the exact same way that everyone else is examining these exact same phenomenon to ensure that there's comparability. We can actually compare what I'm perceiving to what other people are perceiving. This becomes a little tricky when we get into what are known as pseudosciences, and psychology has one of these known as pseudopsychology. And other types of pseudoscience exist in other sciences, especially hard sciences. So, for example, in the field of astronomy, we have astrology. In the field of chemistry, we have alchemy. And many theories of psychopsychology exist, but also many of these theories can't be disproven, which means that they are pseudopsychology and not psychology. So, for example, extrasensory perception is something that unfortunately was talked about in a prime social psychological journal in 2011, where people are able to predict the future to a certain extent, or be able to see things in their mind but not necessarily in their eyes. Another example is repressed memories. There was an abundance in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s of psychologists, for example, counselors or clinicians, telling specific clients that repressed memories were the causes of a lot of their issues in life. Specifically, that previous instances of abuse or child abuse from their parents was leading to some of the issues that they were experiencing now. And a lot of the counselors or clinicians were saying that they didn't remember this because they had repressed these memories. It wasn't possible for them to remember. And of course, their parents wouldn't tell them that because they're not going to admit to doing such a thing. And you should trust me because I'm a trained psychologist. And a lot of these researchers were found to be making a lot of this stuff up, that there was no actual basis for these repressed memories, that they were force-feeding these people these memories and convincing them that these memories were actually true. And a lot of families were destroyed because of these false memories that people were believing. And another example that's probably my favorite is what's known as the homunculus. And this is a theory that there is a tiny person inside all of our brains, who is right in the middle, who controls everything that we do, every action, every word, every thought, every feeling, etc. And that using the technology that we have as humans in the 20th and 21st century, that as soon as we open up the brain or as soon as we use an x-ray, the homunculus, this little man, goes invisible and becomes unable to be detected through the naked eye or any other technology that we have. So again, this is an example of something that can't be disproven. A little man inside all of our brains that turns invisible at the first second that they think they're going to be detected. So none of these are sound science. These are all examples of pseudopsychology. What we want to focus on in this class and what we're going to be talking about in all the research that we discuss is psychology, is based in science. We're going to focus on having strong operational definitions of all of the constructs or the ideas that we're going to be talking about. So this is defining a variable in terms of concrete, observable procedures. Need for objectivity is crucial. We want to measure a specific variable of interest, say depression, for example, in the exact same way that everyone else is going to measure it. So that way when we talk about depression, we know that everyone is on the same page in terms of what we mean when we talk about depression. Also, when we talk about a lot of this research, we're going to have specific hypotheses that people have formulated before they've begun the research, and that people are basing their results on. Are the results supporting their hypothesis, or are they not in support of their hypothesis? So these are testable predictions about how people respond under certain conditions. And hypotheses allow for research to be replicated and allow for research to be falsified. And this is an especially important thing, especially when we think about the homunculus. We may have a hypothesis that there's a little man inside our brain who controls our every move, but according to that theory, we can't prove that it's false. We can't falsify that hypothesis because there's no possible way of us finding this little man because he disappears. So these are two very important aspects of testing within psychology. Other important aspects of psychology, especially when thinking of psychology as a science, is validity. We want to make sure that our study is valid and our hypotheses are valid, and the specific constructs or design of our study is also valid. So there are different types of validity that we can talk about. There's construct validity, and that basically asks the question, is your test measuring what it's supposed to? And does the test that you've conducted behave in the same way that other measures or other tests of the specific variable you're interested in measure? So, for example, if we're interested in measuring depression, or if we're interested specifically in creating a measure of depression, does our test, does our measure, does our questionnaire measure depression? Is it actually getting at depression? And is it measuring depression in the same way that other existing measures of depression assess depression? So, for example, if we're measuring depression and we get a score of 4, do other scores, other tests, also score 4? That means that our test, our measure, may have good construct validity, that it's measuring depression in a similar way that other people are measuring depression. We also have internal validity. Is our manipulation that we're using the only thing that's leading to a change in the variable that we're measuring? So, for example, if we're interested in how annoying noises impact a person's ability to take a math exam, for example, we could put people in a room, give half of them a test with annoying noises, and the other half a test with non-annoying noises, and we can see if there's a difference. But it could be possible that there's other aspects of the experiment that are leading to changes in math score. It could be the fact that, for example, the lighting in the room is different for some people compared to others, and that is what's leading to changes. So basically, focusing on, for internal validity, whether or not the specific thing that we're manipulating, in that example, noise or no noise, is the only thing that's leading to changes in our variable, or are there other extraneous variables, other variables that we weren't anticipating that are leading to changes. And lastly, we have external validity. Basically, does your test, do your results apply to the real world? Is this experiment meaningful for actually applying it to actual humans in actual real world situations? So, for example, if we want to examine how people react to losing poker hands or winning poker hands, if we get these reactions in a laboratory setting, will people behave in the same way, react in the same way, if they were in a real life situation, winning a poker hand or losing a poker hand, say, for example, at a casino? Are people behaving in the lab in the same way that they would if they were behaving in a real world situation? If they are, then the study has good external validity. So these are some things we need to consider because psychology is a science. We want to use scientific approaches to all of our research, to all of our understandings of theories when we talk about psychology. And all subfields of psychology use the scientific method. Social psychology, cognitive psychology, especially psychobiology and neuroscience, developmental psychology, even positive psychology. All of these different subfields use scientific method and use scientific approaches to research. So these subfields that I've mentioned are focused more along the lines of what we call basic research. This is seeking knowledge for the sake of knowledge. This research is often conducted in university settings. We often see a lot of this research published in psychological journals. It kind of goes out and is dispersed amongst other scholars. And then other researchers read this and then formulate new ideas and conduct research based on the findings of others. So it's kind of a cycle of conducting research, using existing research to formulate new ideas, and then continuing the cycle of conducting research. And ideally, we want to get a better understanding of how people behave, how people think, how people feel in the real world. But this information isn't necessarily being used for any other greater purpose other than to just accumulate knowledge of how people behave and how people think. Applied research, on the other hand, actually uses this knowledge and can to a certain extent conduct research, but is basically using this research for a purpose, for a practical significance, if you will. So oftentimes you'll see this occur in more business-oriented settings, conducting research to better understand how consumers of a specific product understand a product, or where this product should be put or placed in the workplace, in a sports arena, in a restaurant, in a supermarket, in order for it to get the best view, for people to be able to see it the most and get the most interest from consumers. And there are other aspects of applied research that can be associated with other subfields of psychology. So for example, clinical psychology and counseling psychology, they use a lot of the research conducted by other clinical and counseling psychologists and put it into practice, actually help other people, help their clients deal with some of the issues of their life using some of this research that they understand. We see in educational psychology, people applying these psychological phenomena to school settings, helping others to learn better. And in industrial and organizational psychology, we see individuals applying this knowledge base to business settings, to specifically workplace settings. How can we be a more efficient workplace? How can we get along better with other workmates? How can we make supervisor-subordinate relationships better, more effective, more cordial, and help make the workplace a better place? So these are examples of how and why we use science in psychology, and how psychology is a science, and some of the ways we can examine some of these questions in different fields of psychology. But that's all we have today. So thank you for your time and attention, and I will see you later. Bye.